Okay, team, here we are. Hi, everybody. Here we are online, and we're going to talk about your quiz number one for incidents in the life of a slave girl. Here's the Wikipedia page for the book. We might come back to this and look at this a little bit later. So, before we actually start with the quiz, I just want to say that I miss everybody, and I hope you guys are doing well and staying safe and staying relatively socially isolated, I hope, which is really frustrating, but in the long run, I think it's something that we have to do. So, here is your Canvas page, and you can see that I have activated the second quiz, and you have until Wednesday, I believe Wednesday night, to finish that one. So, it's plenty of time. And if you missed the update for what we're going to do for the quizzes, here it is. But if you're watching this video, then you probably did not miss the update. And of course, everybody's working on a final paper. So, okay, here's what we're going to go over today. Quiz number one from Life of a Slave Girl. Here we go. Okay, so let's just go right into these questions. You know what? I take that back. Before we go into these questions, let me tell you a little bit about the book. So here, like I said, here's the Wikipedia page. So this is written by Harriet Jacobs, but as you're reading, you know that the character in the story is named Linda, Linda Brent. And so, she used a fictional persona in order to tell the story. So for many years, people thought that this was a novel. They thought this was fiction. Maybe it was based in her real life, but because she changed the name, and this was a time in the 1860s when other books like Uncle Tom's Cabin were coming out that were fictional, that were trying to describe slavery. So people thought this was one of those. And people thought that really up until pretty recently, I believe up until the 1980s. And it should talk about it down here. Yeah, so people, I think for the most part, believed that it was fictional until this woman in the 1980s did a lot of research and went and found a bunch of old documents and things like that and pieced it together and determined that it actually was real. It was not fiction. This is actually her memoir. Now, who's to say if she changed certain things? We're never going to really know. But it seems like, as close as we can figure out, this is actually her true story, her memoir. I don't want to go over too much of the book or the Wikipedia page because I don't want to give away spoilers what happens in the book. I already did that once with 1984, so please forgive me. Okay. And by the way, Harriet Jacobs was born in 1813. This book was published in 1861, so she was in her 40s when this came out. And 1861, I believe, is the year the Civil War started. So there was a lot of big things happening in America at that time. Okay, let's talk about these questions. In chapter 2, Dr. Flint refuses to pay $300 to Linda's grandmother, but keeps the candelabra that was bought using the money. I'm really interested in what this means for us today. But let's look at the book first. And I'm looking on the online version because that's an easy way for us to all look at it together and be on the same page. So I'm going to scroll down a little bit. Here we go. Page 18, or somewhere around there. Let's see. Talking about this candelabra. Here it is. So the grandmother, saved up $300 over many years. And then it was borrowed from her to buy the candelabra, which is like a chandelier. And then it was never repaid. So while my grandmother was thus helping to support me from her hard earnings, the $300 she had lent her mistress, the mistress died, were never repaid. When the mistress died, her son-in-law, Dr. Flint, was appointed executor. When grandmother applied to him for payment, he said the state was insolvent and the law prohibited payment. It did not, however, prohibit him from retaining the silver candelabra, which had been purchased with that money. I presume that will be handed down in the family from generation to generation. So, if we're trying to make some sort of connection between this and our present day, I think what if it's more than just a candelabra? I mean, in this case, somebody works hard, and then the white people end up with the black slave woman works hard, and then the white people end up with the results of it. Okay, well, that's unfair, and we can say, oh, that's so terrible, which, yes, it is, it's true. But the important thing is that the next generation is going to get that candelabra, and those kids are going to grow up feeling like it's theirs. And if one or two generations down the road, a black person says, my grandma bought and paid for that, the white people are going to get mad. What do you mean? I grew up with this. This has been in my family my whole life. This is mine. And when a few generations goes by and the next people don't remember or they don't know how they got the shit that they got, in this case, it's a candelabra. But what if it's something like land? What if it's something like a lot of money and things that was earned and built and worked for by the slaves, but the white people get it? And that's evil, of course, but the thing is that the next generation is not going to know. The next young generation of white kids that grow up with that land and with that house and with that money, that's theirs. They don't understand what the history behind it is. Or even if they understand, that's like something written down in a history book. That's not, our contemporary world. But I think in a lot of ways it is our contemporary world. It's been, 150 years or so since slavery. That's only like two old grandmas living back to back lifetimes. Like it's not that long ago in the big scheme of things. So that was one possible answer that I was thinking of, the idea of inherited wealth or inherited privilege or inherited status that gets passed down from generation to generation. A lot of you put some answer similar to that. Some people just put something like, this is an example of how slavery is bad and racism is bad and that's all evil and bad. Okay, well, yes, that's true, but like we're starting from that point. Okay, we can assume that all this is bad and evil, but I want a little bit more. And some of you did. You guys did a pretty good job on this. Let's look at the next question. What's the differences between Benjamin's and Philip's belief about slavery, and which one is more right? Well, I don't know if I can tell you which one is more right, but we can certainly talk about the different things that they believe. So I'm going to scroll down several pages here. But as I'm scrolling, those are her two brothers, I believe, Benjamin and Philip. And they have very different opinions on what it means to be slave, or what it means to be free, or what it means to be a human, or what it means to be a man. I'm trying to get down to page 28. Yeah, here it is. Now, there's also this character William, who is like a little bit older, and he has a different master, and he's like kind of a mentor for Linda, or somebody that she talks to. And he also plays a factor in this because he says that it's not so much the physical sting of the whip, but he didn't like the idea of being whipped. This sentence is so interesting to me because this is about his pride. This is about like psychology as a man. It's not the physical pain. Of course, that's terrible, but that's not what bothers him so much. It's the idea of it. It's the idea that he has to be subservient to another man and like bow down and let another man be his master. That's what he really can't freaking stand. And that's part of now this is William, okay? Now the question is about Benjamin and Philip, but you can see that this is connected. This idea that like I think it's Benjamin who doesn't he's not playing around with the slavery crap. He doesn't think that this is right. It's not natural. It's not normal, and he doesn't believe in it. And he's not going to play by the rules. He's not going to go by the system, and he's going to bust out of it. Something, I think it was on page 34. Yeah, here it is. You know, they're telling him, trust in God and be humble, and the master will forgive you. And he says, forgive me for what? Meaning to say, I haven't done anything wrong. There's nothing for him. He's going to forgive me. I need to be forgiving him. Forgive me for what? For not letting him treat me like a dog? I'll never humble myself to them. So that's his mindset. So I think most of you guys answered this correctly. And then if you go on to read Philip's viewpoint of it, he wants, of course, he wants his freedom, but he wants to do things in what he considers to be the right way. He wants to work within the system to change the system. He wants to work within the rules and earn his freedom. And Benjamin says the rules are corrupt in the first place, so I'm not playing by these rules. This is an interesting parallel to me. It reminds me of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X in the 20th century had the same goals, which is equality, but they had very different ways on how to get there. And Martin Luther King said, look, we've got to work within the system. We're going to do nonviolent, peaceful protests. We're going to go and talk to members of the Senate. I'm going to try to talk to the president. We're going to work within the system and make the system better. Malcolm X says, forgive my language, but he says, fuck the system, blow up the system. The rules of the system are corrupt at their base. So why should we be playing by these rules in the first place? And he wanted to, have more of a revolutionary type of mindset. So these sorts of parallels are interesting. I think most people answered that question in a good, in-depth way. How does the title of chapter 4 illustrate psychological ramifications? The title of the chapter is The Slave Who Dared to Be a Man. And the answer is obvious for you. Of course, if you're dehumanized when you're a slave, you're not considered to be a real man. You're a piece of property. So the idea that a slave would dare to be a man, of course, is, there's like all these deep psychological things that's going on, both with the slaves and the slave owners have deep set psychological biases about this. Okay. Everyone did pretty well on number 3 and 4. And let's scroll down a little bit more. For number 4, so there's this incident that happened where Nat Turner. Do you guys know Nat Turner? Who in here knows Nat Turner? Raise your hand. Oh, a few of you. Oh, good. Okay, you guys are smart. Good. So, as you know, Nat Turner led a rebellion. And this was, in the 1830s. And it was in Virginia, and he was trying to free the slaves and have an uprising. And they killed a bunch of white people, you can see here, 60 white men, women, and children. Of course, they were rounded up, they were captured, and they were executed. So the rebellion failed. But around the country, all the other slave owners started getting scared. Like, okay, is this going to happen on my plantation? Are the slaves starting an uprising? Like, what's going on? So that's what's happening here in the book. It says here, not far from this time, Nat Turner's insurrection broke out, and the news threw our town into great commotion. Strange that they should be alarmed when their slaves were so contented and happy, but so it was. And that's, of course, sarcasm. The slaves are not contented and happy. They're living as slaves. But that's the myth. That's the white myth. Well, they're content. They're happy being slaves. Well, if the slaves are so content and happy, then why are you so worried about a rebellion? Obviously, you know that they're not content and happy. So that's what's happening. So they gather up, all the white people in town, and they're going to go around and search all the houses and overturn everything and terrorize the black community, basically, because they want to make sure that there's no secret plans being made for a rebellion. So our narrator tells us here, it was a grand opportunity for the low whites, meaning the poor whites, the ones who don't own slaves. It was a grand opportunity for them who had no Negroes of their own to scourge, to beat. They exulted in such a chance to exercise a little brief authority, to show their subserviency to the slaveholders. To show their subserviency to the slaveholders. Not reflecting that the power which trampled on the colored people also kept themselves in poverty, ignorance, and moral degradation. So everybody answered this question pretty good. It was an opportunity for the poor whites to at least be higher up than somebody on the social ladder. And the minute that they get a chance to abuse the slaves, then they take that advantage. They take full advantage of that opportunity, and they abuse them, and they're mean to them. They do all these things. But it's interesting that our narrator, Linda Harriet, she notices that It's the white slave owners, the white rich people, that's keeping these white poor people down, but the white poor people don't even realize it. They don't realize that the same people that's keeping slaves is keeping these white people as slaves. Not really, not legally as slaves, but keeping them ignorant and poor, and then pitting them against each other, pitting the poor whites and the slaves against each other, so that the rich whites can stay in power. So, she never mentions like classism or Marxism or anything of that nature, but it seems like that's what she's writing about. The idea that maybe it's not just about race, but it's also about class. And the people that's rich and in charge is going to take the lower groups and pit them against each other in order to stay in charge. Now, how can we apply that to today's world? I don't even have to tell y'all. The rich corporations and the top 1% is doing this exact same thing today. Okay. And then finally, the quote from Ephesians, which I think is a little bit further down, a few pages down here. Let's see, where is that? It's when they go to church and the white preacher is telling them how they should be acting. Here it is, the church and slavery. Yeah. After the alarm caused by Nat Turner's insurrection had subsided, the slaveholders came to the conclusion that it would be well to give the slaves enough of religious instruction to keep them from murdering their masters. So, are they really interested in saving the souls of these slaves? Hell no. They just want to tell them, hey, the Bible says don't kill. The Bible says this, the Bible says that, so they won't rise up again. And one verse that slave owners have always leaned back upon for centuries is this verse from Ephesians. And I don't remember the exact page that it's on, somewhere around here. Here it is. Servants, be obedient to them that are your masters. So it doesn't tell us that this is from Ephesians, but it is. This is from Paul's epistle to the Ephesians. The book of Ephesians, chapter 6. Slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear. So throughout the centuries, when people would say, slavery is wrong, we shouldn't have this anymore, slave owners would always say, well, it's in the Bible. It says slaves obey your masters right there in the Bible. And they were still using that argument all the way up into the Civil War. So that's what she's talking about, the church and slavery, and how in her opinion Christianity is being used or manipulated for evil purposes, which it might not be a surprise to us in a modern day world. Any religion can be used or manipulated for evil purposes. One thing that you got to keep in mind is, was the Bible really pro-slavery? Is Christianity saying that slavery is right? I mean, is that what the Bible is telling us here? I don't have the answer to that, but I can tell you that slavery in the time of ancient Rome, in the time of the Apostle Paul when he was writing, was much different than slavery on a plantation in the United States. In ancient Rome in the Middle East, first of all, slavery was not based on race. They didn't even see or notice race back then. What they notice is, we beat you guys in a war, and therefore we taking all of y'all prisoner, and you're going to come back to Rome and be slaves. And it doesn't have nothing to do with what color you are. Also, when you are slaves, you can get married, you have legal rights, you can buy your way out of slavery a lot easier than what they're doing in in the United States version of slavery. Ancient Rome had just a different version of slavery. Now, of course, I'm not saying that slavery is right. It's wrong. There's no doubt about that. It's wrong. But what I'm trying to say is, at the time that this was written, this was not talking about taking people of a certain color and putting them and making them work like mules on a plantation and beating and torturing them. That's not what was necessarily happening in the ancient world. That only really started to happen after the discovery of the New World. So, we could talk about this probably through the entire semester, but it's really interesting because a lot of people have looked to this passage to justify slavery. If you read the whole passage, though, it becomes more interesting because after it says, slaves, obey your masters and serve them wholeheartedly as if you were serving the Lord, Okay, but then a lot of people forget the next couple verses here says, "Masters, you have to treat your slaves well." You know, the slave owners who always quoted this part, they tended to leave out this part down here. So I was hoping for some sort of discussion of those ideas when you're answering number five. It's some people have different interpretations or whatever. So I'm open, I'm flexible to different answers on that. So that's basically what I had in mind for quiz number one. Let's see, what have we covered? That's the book itself, the Wikipedia, Nat Turner, Ephesians. Yeah, this seems pretty simple and straightforward. So let's go back to your modules. And you have quiz number two coming up. So there it is. And you know what? Let's just look at it. You have until April 1st. I believe that's Wednesday night. Yeah, we're not going to go over that. We'll go over that next time after you take the quiz. Okay. If anybody has personal or specific questions about your personal project or your paper that you're working on, please email me. If anybody has any questions or concerns about anything regarding the class, please email me and let me know. And everybody stay safe out there and stay isolated as best you can. Okay, bye guys.